The studio lights hit a little harsher that morning, reflecting off the glossy table like something was about to crack beneath the surface. No one in the audience knew it yet, but within minutes, the atmosphere inside the view would shift from polite conversation to something raw, unpredictable, and impossible to look away from. Wait, did she just say that? A murmur rippled through the crowd as Miley Cyrus leaned forward, her expression no longer relaxed, her usual playful confidence now edged with something sharper. Across from her, Sara Haines held her posture steady, but her eyes betrayed it. This wasn't going the way producers had planned. Backhand index pointing right before we dive deeper into this explosive moment. Make sure you subscribe to Talk Battles, hit that like button, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is just the beginning. It had all started so smoothly. Sara Haines opened the segment with her signature warmth, introducing Miley not just as a global superstar, but as an artist in constant reinvention. She mentioned Miley's recent work, her evolving sound, her introspective songwriting, the way she'd stepped into a more mature, reflective phase of her career. There was talk of her latest music, her creative risks, and how she'd redefined herself yet again in an industry that rarely forgives change. Miley smiled at first, nodding along. She talked about growth, about shedding old skins, about learning to be comfortable in silence after years of chaos. Her voice carried a calm confidence, the kind that only comes after surviving storms most people couldn't imagine. "I've lived a lot of lives already," she said softly, almost more to herself than the audience. "And I'm finally okay with not having all the answers." The audience responded with gentle applause. It was the kind of moment daytime television thrives on, honest, reflective, inspiring. But then something shifted. Sara tilted her head slightly, her tone changing just enough to be noticed. "You've definitely evolved," she said carefully. "But some people feel like your past, your more controversial phases, still define how the public sees you. Do you ever feel like you're trying to outrun that version of yourself?" For a split second, everything froze. Miley's smile didn't disappear, but it stopped reaching her eyes. The camera zoomed in just enough to catch it. The tension, the calculation. And then she leaned forward. "I'm not outrunning anything," Miley replied, her voice steady but firmer now. "I'm owning all of it. Every version. Even the ones people love to judge." A few claps echoed from the audience, but they were hesitant, uncertain. Sara nodded, but she didn't back down. "I get that," she continued. "But do you think sometimes that ownership comes off as deflection? Like instead of addressing criticism, you kind of rebrand it?" There it was, the question that changed everything. A visible reaction this time. Miley's jaw tightened slightly. She glanced down for a moment, then back up, locking eyes with Sara in a way that made the room feel smaller. "Or maybe," Miley said slowly, "people just don't like when a woman refuses to apologize for growing." The audience gasped, audibly this time. Sara blinked, clearly not expecting that level of pushback so quickly. "That's not what I'm saying," she replied, trying to maintain control of the conversation. "I think people just want accountability. And who decides what that looks like?" Miley cut in, her voice rising just a fraction. "The same people who built me up just to tear me down." The tension was no longer subtle. It was thick, tangible. Even the co-hosts shifted in their seats. Sara inhaled, choosing her words more carefully now. "You've had an incredible journey," she said, softer this time. "From your early days in the spotlight to now. It's been public, and not always easy. But with that visibility comes responsibility, right?" Miley leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. Not defensively, but deliberately. "I was a kid," she said. "A literal kid. Growing up in front of millions of people who expected perfection while criticizing every mistake. And now, years later, I'm still being asked to explain myself like I owe the world something." Her voice cracked, just slightly. But it was enough. The audience fell silent. For a moment, the fiery pop icon disappeared, and in her place was someone far more vulnerable. Sara noticed it too. Her expression softened. "No one's denying how hard that must have been," she said gently. "But people connect with honesty. That's all I'm trying to get at." Miley nodded slowly, but her eyes remained intense. "I am being honest," she said. "Maybe just not in the way people expect." A pause. A long one. You could almost hear the producers scrambling behind the scenes. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a confrontation, layered with years of public scrutiny, personal growth, and unresolved tension between perception and reality. Sara shifted again, this time leaning in slightly. Can I ask you something more personal? She said. Miley didn't hesitate. You already are. A few nervous laughs broke out, but they quickly faded. Sara pressed on. When you look back at your life, your career, your relationships, the moments that defined you, do you ever wish you'd done things differently? That question hung in the air like a challenge. Miley didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out at the audience, then back at Sara, then straight into the camera. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but far more powerful. If I changed anything, she said, I wouldn't be who I am sitting here right now. And honestly, I fought too hard to become this person to regret her. The audience erupted into applause, louder this time, more certain. But Sara didn't clap. She was watching Miley carefully, studying her. Because beneath the confidence, beneath the defiance, there was something else. Something unresolved. And as the segment continued, it became clear. This conversation was far from over. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. It lingered in the air like a storm that hadn't fully broken yet. The cameras were still rolling, the smiles were still technically in place. But something deeper had been unlocked between Miley Cyrus and Sara Haines, something neither of them could simply smooth over with polite television energy. Miley sat back, one leg crossed over the other, her fingers tapping lightly against her arm. It wasn't nervousness, it was restraint. The kind that comes when you're holding back more than you're saying. Sara noticed it, and instead of stepping away, she leaned further in. You've clearly made peace with your past, Sara said, her tone measured but probing. But I think what people struggle with is understanding where the line is between expression and impact. Especially when you have millions of young fans watching you. A subtle shift. Miley's tapping stopped. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in focus. So this is about influence now? Miley asked, her voice calm but unmistakably sharper. It's always been about influence, Sara replied, holding her ground. You've been a role model whether you wanted to be or not. That word, role model, it landed heavily. Miley let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. I never signed a contract that said I had to be perfect for everyone else's kids, she said. I signed up to be an artist, a human being, someone who makes mistakes and learns from them. The audience shifted again, some nodding, others exchanging glances. The room was divided now. Sara tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful but persistent. But do you think there were moments, she continued, where maybe the message got lost? Where the shock value overshadowed the growth? Miley didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward again, elbows resting lightly on the table. This time, her voice dropped, quieter but more intense. Let me ask you something, she said, locking eyes with Sara. Why is it that when a man in this industry pushes boundaries, he's called bold? But when I do it, I'm called a problem. A ripple of reactions swept through the audience, some clapping, others visibly surprised. Sara opened her mouth to respond, but paused. Because it wasn't just a question. It was an accusation. I don't think that's entirely fair, Sara said carefully. There are double standards, yes, but that doesn't mean every criticism is rooted in that. Miley nodded slowly. Of course not, she said. But a lot of it is. And I've lived it. Her voice softened slightly, and for a moment the edge faded. I grew up on stages, she continued. I didn't get the luxury of figuring myself out in private. Every phase, every mistake, every transformation, it was all public. And people didn't just watch, they judged. The room quieted again. Even Sara's posture softened. Miley continued, her words more reflective now. There were nights, she admitted, where I'd go back to my hotel room after a performance and just sit there, wondering if I'd gone too far, if I'd lost myself trying to prove something. That vulnerability hit differently. The audience leaned in. Sara's expression shifted. Less confrontational now, more empathetic. But you kept going, Sara said gently. Miley gave a small nod. Because stopping would have meant letting them define me, she said. And I wasn't willing to do that. A pause. A deep one. But then Sara asked the question that reignited everything. Do you think, she said slowly, that in trying so hard not to be defined by others, you sometimes created a version of yourself that wasn't entirely real either? The air snapped. Miley's head tilted slightly, her eyes sharpening again. That's interesting, she said, because I could ask the same thing about this show. A collective gasp. One of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably. Sara blinked, caught off guard for the first time. What do you mean? She asked. Miley didn't hesitate. I mean, she said, her voice steady but cutting. This space, the view, it's built on opinions, right? Strong ones. But sometimes it feels like those opinions are shaped more by what gets reactions than what's actually real. The audience reacted instantly, some clapping, others stunned into silence. Sara straightened slightly, her composure returning. But there was a flicker of something else now. Defensiveness. We have honest conversations here, she replied. That's what people expect from us. And I respect that, Miley said quickly. But honesty goes both ways. You're asking me to dissect my life, my choices, my identity on live TV. So yeah, I'm going to push back. The tension was at its peak now. Two perspectives. Two worlds. Colliding in real time. Sara leaned forward again, her voice firmer now. And I think pushing back is fair, she said. But so is asking questions. That's what this platform is for. Miley nodded once. Then let's be real, she said. Not just comfortable. Another pause. This one heavier than the rest. Because now it wasn't just about Miley anymore. It was about the nature of the conversation itself. The cameras. The audience. The expectations. Sara took a breath, then shifted the direction slightly. Let's talk about your music, she said, her tone easing, but the underlying tension still there. Your recent work feels more introspective, more grounded. Where is that coming from? Miley's expression changed again, less guarded, more thoughtful. From finally being still, she said. From not needing to prove anything anymore. And what does that look like for you? Sara asked. Miley smiled faintly. It looks like waking up and not caring what the internet thinks, she said. It looks like making music that feels true, even if it doesn't break records. It looks like choosing peace over attention. The audience responded warmly to that. But Sara wasn't done. Do you think the audience is ready for that version of you? She asked. Miley's smile lingered, but her answer came without hesitation. If they're not, she said, that's okay. Because for the first time in my life, I am. Silence. Then applause. Real, genuine applause. But beneath it all, the tension still simmered. Because even as the conversation softened, the undercurrent remained. Unresolved. Unfinished. And as the cameras continued to roll, one thing was becoming clear. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a clash of identity, expectation, and truth. And it was only getting deeper. The applause carried on a little longer this time, but it felt different now. Less like polite encouragement, and more like the audience was trying to process what they had just witnessed. Because this wasn't just a conversation anymore. It had become something personal. Miley Cyrus sat still for a moment, her expression calm on the surface. But her eyes told a different story. There was weight behind them now. Years of it. And across the table, Sara Haines could feel it too. For the first time since the segment began, Sara didn't jump in right away. She studied Miley. Not as a host, but as a person trying to understand another person. And then quietly, I think people forget, Sara said, her tone softer than before, that behind all the headlines, there's a human being who had to live through all of it. The shift was immediate. Miley's posture relaxed, just slightly. But she didn't speak yet. Sara continued, choosing her words more carefully now. You've been under a microscope since you were a teenager. Every phase of your life became public conversation. That kind of pressure, it changes you. Miley let out a small breath, almost like she'd been holding it in for years. It doesn't just change you, she said quietly. It forces you to grow in ways you're not ready for. The audience fell completely silent. No murmurs this time. No shifting. Just listening. There were moments, Miley continued, her voice steady but emotional, where I didn't even know who I was anymore. Because the version of me the world saw wasn't always the version I felt inside. That honesty hit harder than anything she'd said before. Sara nodded slowly. Was there a specific moment, she asked gently, where you realized something had to change? Miley looked down at her hands. For a few seconds, she didn't answer. And when she finally did, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. There wasn't just one moment, she said. It was a series of them. Small realizations that kept building up. She looked back up, her eyes glistening under the studio lights. Like waking up one day and realizing you're exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. Tired of performing a version of yourself that doesn't fully belong to you anymore. The audience shifted, some nodding, some visibly moved. Sara leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper now. And what did you do when you realized that? Miley smiled faintly, but there was pain behind it, I broke, she said simply. The word landed like a weight in the room. No music. No dramatic pause. Just truth. And breaking isn't pretty, Miley continued. It's messy. It's confusing. It makes people uncomfortable, especially when they've built an image of who you're supposed to be. Sara swallowed, clearly affected now. But sometimes, Miley added, her voice gaining strength again, breaking is the only way you rebuild something real. A few people in the audience started clapping, softly at first, then louder. This wasn't the applause of entertainment. This was connection. But Sara wasn't finished. Because even in this moment of vulnerability, there was still something unresolved. Do you think, she said carefully, that the world gave you space to rebuild? Or did you have to fight for that too? Miley didn't hesitate this time. I had to take it, she said. Because no one just gives you that kind of space, especially not when your story sells. A subtle tension returned. Not as sharp as before, but present. Sara nodded slowly. That's fair, she admitted. But there are also people who feel like they grew up with you, who supported you through every phase. And sometimes when you changed, they felt left behind. Miley tilted her head slightly, considering that. I get that, she said. I really do. But growing up means changing. And not everyone is meant to come with you through every version of yourself. The audience reacted again, some clapping, others quiet. Sara pressed gently. So you're okay with losing people along the way? Miley's answer came without hesitation. I'm okay with losing versions of myself that weren't true, she said. And if that means some people don't connect with me anymore, then yeah, I've made peace with that. The honesty was undeniable. But it wasn't easy to hear. Sara leaned back slightly, taking that in. Then after a pause, I want to go back to something you said earlier, she added. About being judged, especially as a woman in this industry. Miley's expression shifted again, more focused now. You said there's a double standard, Sara continued. And I don't disagree. But do you think sometimes that conversation can overshadow personal accountability? There it was again. The tension. Not explosive this time, but deeper. More complex. Miley didn't react immediately. Instead, she leaned forward slowly, her voice calm but deliberate. Accountability isn't something I avoid, she said. It's something I've lived with, publicly, for years. She paused, then continued. I've apologized when I needed to. I've reflected. I've grown. But what I won't do is stay stuck in a version of myself just to make other people comfortable. The audience responded with a mix of applause and thoughtful silence. Sara nodded, acknowledging the point, but still holding her ground. And I respect that, she said. I really do. I just think people are trying to understand the full picture. Miley's gaze softened slightly. Then maybe, she said, the full picture is that I'm still figuring it out, just like everyone else. A quiet moment passed between them. Not tense, not confrontational, just real. But then, one of the co-hosts shifted in her seat, glancing toward Sara, as if sensing something still unresolved beneath the surface. And Sara felt it too, because even after everything that had been said, there was one question left unasked. One that had been building since the very beginning. She leaned forward one last time, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything that had come before. After everything you've been through, she said, after all the criticism, the growth, the reinvention, what scares you now? The room froze. Miley didn't move, didn't blink. And for the first time since the interview began, she didn't have an immediate answer. The silence stretched. The cameras stayed locked. The audience held its breath. And in that moment, it became clear. The most powerful part of this story was still waiting to be said. The silence didn't just linger. It pressed. You could feel it in the stillness of the studio, in the way no one dared to move, in the way the lights suddenly felt too bright for such a quiet moment. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. What scares you now? Miley Cyrus didn't look away this time. She didn't deflect. She didn't smile. For the first time since stepping onto the stage of The View, she just sat with it. And then slowly, almost like she was choosing whether to let the world see one more layer. I think, she began, her voice quieter than it had been all morning, what scares me now is losing this version of myself. The room didn't react. Not yet, because no one expected that answer. Miley continued, her gaze steady but distant, like she was speaking from somewhere deeper than the studio. I've spent years fighting to become someone I actually recognize, she said. Someone who isn't just a headline or a phase or a moment people can debate on TV. A subtle shift in the audience, people leaning forward, fully locked in. And now that I'm here, she added, her voice tightening just slightly, the idea of losing that, of slipping back into something performative, something expected, that terrifies me more than any criticism ever did. That was it. That was the truth she hadn't said before. The applause didn't come immediately, because this wasn't something to clap over. This was something to feel. Across the table, Sara Haines sat still, her expression no longer analytical, no longer probing. Just human. I don't think people see that side enough, Sara said softly. They see the confidence, the boldness, but not the fear behind protecting it. Miley gave a small, almost relieved smile. Because fear doesn't trend, she said. A few quiet laughs rippled through the audience, but they faded quickly. Sara nodded. But maybe it should, she replied. A pause. Not tense this time. Just reflective. But then, almost inevitably, the reality of what had just happened began to settle in. Because this wasn't just a heartfelt moment. This was live television. And moments like this don't stay contained. The camera slowly widened, capturing both women in the frame. The distance between them no longer filled with confrontation, but with something far more complicated. Understanding, respect, and maybe a little bit of unfinished tension. Sara straightened slightly, returning, just enough, to her role as host. I think what makes this conversation powerful, she said, addressing both Miley and the audience, is that it's not clean. It's not wrapped up in a perfect message. It's real. And real is messy. Miley nodded. Yeah, she said. But messy is honest. The audience responded this time, soft applause, growing steadily louder. And then louder, until the entire room was on its feet. A standing ovation, not for a performance, but for something far more rare. Truth. But even as the applause filled the studio, something else was already beginning outside those walls. Phones lighting up. Clips being cut. Moments being replayed. Within minutes, the conversation between Miley Cyrus and Sara Haines was everywhere. Social media exploded. Some viewers praised Miley's honesty, calling it one of the most raw, unfiltered moments they'd ever seen on The View. Others sided with Sara, arguing that the questions needed to be asked, that accountability and reflection go hand in hand. Clips of Miley saying, "I'm not outrunning anything. I'm owning all of it," began trending. So did her final answer. What scares me now is losing this version of myself. Media outlets picked it apart. Fans defended her. Critics debated her. And just like that, what started as an interview became a cultural moment. Back in the studio, though, none of that noise had fully arrived yet. There was just the aftermath. Miley stood up slowly, taking a breath as the applause continued. She glanced at Sara, just for a second, and in that look, there was no hostility left. Just recognition. Because despite everything, the tension, the pushback, the difficult questions, they had both done something rare. They had not played it safe. Sara stood as well, offering a small smile. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Miley nodded. "Thank you for not making it easy," she replied. A surprising response, but an honest one. The audience reacted warmly again, this time with a sense of closure. But for viewers watching at home, this was only the beginning. Because conversations like this don't end when the cameras stop. They continue, in comments, in debates, in personal reflections. And now it's your turn. What did you think of this intense moment between Miley Cyrus and Sara Haines? Was Miley right to stand her ground? Or did Sara ask the questions that needed to be asked? Drop your opinion in the comments below, because your voice is part of this conversation too. And if you want more cinematic, explosive, and emotional stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Talk Battles, hit that like button, and stay tuned. Because the next story might be even bigger.